On the morning my daughter got married, I stood alone in the bathroom of a lakeside hotel and stared at my reflection while trying not to fall apart. My hands gripped the marble counter so tightly that my fingers hurt. I whispered to myself that I could cry later, just not before I finally spoke the truth I had carried for more than 2 decades. At 63, I thought I understood grief. I had survived widowhood, illness, exhaustion, and years of loneliness, but that morning felt different. It felt like standing on the edge of a decision that could either destroy my family or finally free me from the weight I had carried for 22 years. Inside my purse was a folded white card that had felt heavy for 11 months. My hair was silver and cut short because it had never grown back the same after chemotherapy. The lines around my eyes had settled there years ago, and I had stopped trying to erase them. My daughter, Leela, had chosen my powder blue dress herself. She said it made me look like the kind of grandmother children would immediately trust, and I held on to that memory while I touched the card hidden inside my purse. I grew up in northern Ontario in a mining town where winter settled into every crack of life. My father worked underground his entire life, and when I was little I assumed every man in the world came home smelling like metal and grease. I left home at 19 to study nursing because I wanted a future that felt steadier and more meaningful than the life I had known. That was where I met my husband, Caleb. He was an electrician with warm brown eyes and an easy laugh that made strangers smile. We married young and settled in a small town outside Thunder Bay. For a few brief years, life felt safe. Then Caleb died in a fire at a construction site when Leela was only 3 years old. The investigation revealed that several safety inspections had been skipped and records had been falsified. A subcontractor had approved electrical work that had never actually been inspected. That subcontractor was a developer named Preston Mercer. I wrote his name over and over in an old notebook during the first year after Caleb died, because I was terrified my anger would fade before justice ever arrived. Nothing happened to Preston. He hired lawyers and used his connections. There were meetings, documents, and promises, and in the end I was handed a settlement barely large enough to keep food on the table. I signed the papers because my refrigerator was nearly empty and my daughter needed winter boots. I remember sitting at my kitchen table afterward feeling like I had traded something sacred just to survive another month. I moved back to Sudbury with Leela and rebuilt our lives from scratch. I worked double shifts at the hospital, slept whenever I could, and attended school concerts half awake after 12-hour nights. I packed lunches, paid bills, fixed broken faucets, and learned how to be both parents at once. Leela grew into a fearless, outgoing woman who inherited her father's kindness and my stubbornness. 3 years ago, Leela called me one Tuesday evening and told me she had met someone. His name was Nolan, and he worked in commercial development in Toronto. When she brought him home, I liked him almost immediately. He was thoughtful without trying too hard, carried dishes into the kitchen after dinner, and listened carefully whenever Leela spoke. He mentioned only briefly that his father worked in development and construction. Everything changed at their engagement party. The party was held at Nolan family home in Oakville, a large house in a neighborhood where every driveway looked like a luxury car showroom. I arrived carrying a bottle of wine and a wrapped gift, nervous in the ordinary way mothers are when meeting future in-laws. Then the front door opened and standing there smiling at me was Preston Mercer. For a second, the world stopped moving. He had aged, of course. His hair was mostly white now, and his face carried the softness of old age, but I recognized him instantly from newspaper photos and archived business articles I had studied years earlier. He did not recognize me. To him, I had been nothing more than a grieving widow attached to paperwork he had buried decades ago. I survived that evening without collapsing, but the drive home was silent. I kept both hands locked on the steering wheel for 4 straight hours. I did not tell Leela what I had discovered because I knew my daughter. If I told her immediately, she would feel trapped between loyalty to me and love for Nolan. I could not bear the thought of turning my grief into a weapon that forced her to choose sides. Instead, I hired a lawyer. For nearly a year, I quietly reopened every wound I had spent decades trying to survive. We dug through records, legal filings, inspection reports, and corporate histories. What we uncovered was worse than I had imagined. Preston had been connected to multiple safety violations over the years, including another development project where inspections had been approved fraudulently. By summer, formal complaints had been filed with provincial regulators. The non-disclosure agreement I had signed years earlier did not prevent me from cooperating with investigations. My lawyer handed me a small white summary card listing complaint numbers and investigator names. That was the card sitting in my purse on the morning of the wedding. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Leela looked radiant walking down the aisle. And for a few precious hours I almost convinced myself I could keep the truth buried a little longer. But during the reception, Preston stood to make a speech. He praised Nolan, spoke about business success, and then turned his attention to my daughter. Smiling into the microphone, he said it was wonderful that Leela had risen above her modest upbringing and found a better life through their family. The room went still around me. I saw Leela's face freeze with humiliation. I saw Nolan stare at his father with disbelief. In that instant, every ear of silence inside me cracked open. I stood slowly with my water glass in my hand and asked if I could say something. Conversations faded as the room quieted. I looked directly at Preston Mercer for the first time in 22 years and told everyone that my husband had died at a construction site when my daughter was 3 years old. I explained that the safety inspection had been falsified by the same man standing at the microphone. I also told them that there was now an active investigation into his business practices and that my daughter deserved to know exactly who was sitting at her wedding table. The silence afterward felt endless. Then Nolan stood and told his father that they needed to step outside immediately. Guests whispered, some relatives left, and the reception dissolved into confusion. I sat alone on the dock behind the venue with my shoes off, staring at the lake while the sunset turned the sky orange and pink. Eventually Leela found me and sat beside me quietly for a long time. When I admitted that I had discovered the truth at the engagement party, tears filled her eyes. I apologized for keeping it from her, explaining that I never wanted her marriage to begin with an ultimatum. She looked at me through her tears and said that she would have chosen me. We both cried after that, and then a duck wandered ridiculously close to the dock, completely unaware of the emotional devastation unfolding nearby. We started laughing through our tears because life has a strange habit of remaining ordinary even during its most painful moments. A little later, Nolan joined us. He apologized for what his father had done and admitted that he had known for years that his father was unethical in business. Though he had never understood the full extent of it, he promised to cooperate fully with the investigation and help ensure that the truth came out. I believed him because he looked directly at me when he spoke. The investigation is still ongoing, it may take years, and maybe nothing substantial will happen in the end. But that no longer feels like the most important part. What matters is that the truth now exists publicly. There is finally an official record connecting my husband's death to the man responsible. Silence protected Preston Mercer for 22 years. And the moment I finally spoke, that silence lost its power forever. A few months after the wedding, Leela called to tell me she was pregnant. I sat down at my kitchen table so suddenly that I nearly knocked over my tea. After we hung up, I walked outside into the cold autumn air and stood among the birch trees in my backyard. A few stubborn yellow leaves still clung to the branches long after they should have fallen. Somehow, that felt exactly right. Survival is not dramatic revenge or perfect justice. It is enduring long enough to finally speak the truth out loud after years of carrying it alone.